As Guyana sits on the economic and political crossroads, we speak to the nation's opinion leaders and decision makers to get their views on the challenges the country faces and the path it must take to achieve national development. Welcome to Nation Watch. Now here is your host Mervyn Williams, former member of the Guyana Parliament.
To ensure that the tenets of democracy prevail. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to continue the conversation on the Guyana-Venezuela border controversy. And again this week, my guest is Ambassador Ronald, CCH, who has worked extensively in this particular area and who has so far given Guyana more than 40 years of service in international relations. Mr. Austin, thank you very much once again for joining me on Nation Watch.
Thank you for inviting me back.
Last week, we discussed a number of issues. We touched on the Washington Conference of 1897,
Washington Treaty
of 1897, and how that laid the groundwork for what would emerge as the Arbitral Tribunal Award of 1899.
Right.
We spoke about the 1905 reaffirmation by Venezuela to the
demarcation of the boundaries, and
right,
they accepted the demarcation of the
which is a reaffirmation of the Arbitral Tribunal Award. And subsequent to that, in 1931, I believe there was the actual marking of the tri-junction.
1938.
1938. Guyana, Venezuela, Brazil. We touched briefly on the fact that in 1962, Venezuela declared the Arbitral Tribunal Award to be null and void, when in fact they agreed in 1899, as did the United Kingdom, that it was a full and final settlement of the boundaries between the two countries. And then there was the Geneva Agreement of 1966, which resulted in first the Good Officers process, which
Mixed commission.
the mixed commission. You forgive me,
It's
I'm without
okay.
my notes.
It's okay.
Working from memory, and the Good Officer process flowed, lasted for I believe 25 years, yielded no results. And then the matter was subsequently, in accordance with the Geneva Agreement, referred to the International Court of Justice. And here is where we are.
Okay.
Following the conversation of last Sunday, Mr. Austin, a number of things happened. We discussed the need for diplomatic measures to be put in place. We discussed the need for a national educational campaign to take off. We discussed the need for the National Assembly of the Parliament to be to meet, and for the committees of border security and foreign affairs to be convened to discuss this issue. Since then, a number of things have happened. Mr. Ali engaged the leader of the opposition on Tuesday last. That engagement lasted for a while and was described as a fruitful meeting by the leader of the opposition. Coming out of that, there was a joint statement. And on Wednesday, I believe it was, the following day, the Parliamentary Committee on Foreign Affairs met. So a number of things have started to happen. How do you see these new developments in light of what we discussed last Sunday, moving Guyana forward on these issues?
As I said, I'm glad you considered me worthy of being of getting another invitation to your program. And as I said the last time that we spoke, I hope this is a continuous program or process of education, both for our party and for the Guyanese public. To answer your question directly, I think this is a good situation and period for the people of Guyana. The meeting that was held at the office of the president, as the leader of the opposition said, the leader of our party said, was quite positive. There was a good exchange between the delegation of the opposition and the government team, which consisted of President Ali, Vice President Jardine, Prime Minister Phillips, and Mr. Shearer. And out of that discussion was a joint declaration, which is in the public domain now, and I need not go into details about it. But it followed basically what we discussed previously, the need for a robust diplomatic response to the current situation on the border, the need for a continuous education program, the need to inform the rest of the world as to the aggression and the perfidy of the current administration of Venezuela. And I'm happy to see, as you indicated, that the Parliamentary Foreign Affairs Committee has met, and Parliament is due to meet on November 3rd. I assume the purpose of that meeting of Parliament is to have a joint resolution setting out the position of both the opposition and the government. Now, all these things are fine, but what has happened over the years, and this is something I've shared with, a concern I've shared with the leader of the opposition, and that is, once we start out on this journey, we cannot interrupt what we're doing. We cannot put a pause on what we're doing. This has to be sustained both at the level of the government, the opposition, and the rest of the society. I say this because I think, in my judgment, the situation that we are facing on the border right now is a very, very serious one. It's not like any other situation we faced before. I mean, this constant buildup of troops on the border. I mean, there are various theories about why the Venezuelan soldiers are there. There's one theory that is there to clean out or to get rid of the illegal mining operations and so on. For me, that is a plausible excuse. It is not convincing to me, because over the years, there are several examples of Venezuelan military intruding into our airspace, blowing up pontoons. And each explanation for the intrusion of the Venezuelan military into our territory has been one, when you look at it very carefully, it is visible. Secondly, it is clear that the propaganda campaign this time around on the part of Venezuela is quite extensive, it's massive, it's concentrated, as you can see in the recent declaration by Ms. Delcy Rodriguez for the upcoming referendum, the support of it by Venezuela in general, and it seems the Maduro administration seems to be engaging in a full court operation as far as the controversy is concerned on this occasion. Whether it is for him, because his government is weak internally and is using the border controversy to turn it outwards. The fact of the matter is, we are facing the consequences or the brunt of what they're doing. And that is where we have to focus. And I do hope that what we started, as I said, is continued, reinforced, and amplified as we go along.
The troop buildups on the one hand, the entry of Venezuelans, civilians, quote unquote, is another issue. We will get to Vice President Rodriguez before the end of this program. But we have fresh footage and fresh still photographs, which we'll show our viewers, of large numbers of arriving Venezuelans. We have footage on the East Bank Essequibo, still photographs of them arriving in East Bank Essequibo. We have video footage, which we'll show now, of them arriving at Anna Regina, on the Essequibo coast. And this, in the context of where we are now, presents some worry. Are these refugees? Are these economic migrants? Are these undercover military operatives? What do we have as a method of detection to determine what categories of persons are entering our country, even as their home country increases their troops along our borders? Is this a soft invasion? Is the military on the periphery waiting for some signal to launch an offensive? What do you make of this, sir?
Well, I mean, there are two ends to this entire problem. I mean, you have at one end, it's maybe a question of refugees or economic migrants, and the other end is a question of the soft invasion, which a lot of people, certainly some people whose opinion you can't ignore, have spoken about over the last couple of weeks. You can't miss the presence of a large number of Venezuelans in our society right now. Whether you're walking along Regent Street, when you go into business places, when you go to certain areas of this country, there's a place on the East Coast which I know is called Spanish Town. Quite a lot of Venezuelans.
Already?
Yes. What I do not know is if the administration has been able, in a precise and programmatic manner, they've been able to identify and record the presence of all of these people, these refugees in Guyana. The figure normally given is 21,000. I've heard
102,000.
31,000. I've heard 100,000. And it might be in the best interest of the government and the rest of the society if we can have a precise figure of exactly how many Venezuelans are in Guyana. When we met with the president, and I'm not telling Theodore to school, he gave us every assurance that the government was on top of this situation. And they were using the instruments of both the United Nations Refugee Program and the International Migration Organization. And I think that is an accurate statement because I happen to know that even before I left the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, this was being done as the president indicated. Now, it's one thing to say that you have a policy in place, and I have no reason to question what the president has said. But in any society, there are always, especially in relation to refugees, there are always anomalies. There are people who are going to get wrong in the system. You know, there are Venezuelans that I've met who have children based on marriage to Guyanese, and when you meet them, the name that comes out, or the name which is given, is not a Venezuelan name. It's
English name.
Yes, it's Mrs. Williams or Mrs. Austin and so on. Until you see the person, you recognize that the person is not Venezuelan, is not Guyanese. I say this to say that in an effort to answer the question that you raised, are we confident? Are we sure that we know exactly what these migrants and refugees are up to? The fact of the matter is, I do not think anybody actually knows. And given that we have such a sensitive, complex, and demanding issue as the border controversy, and it is an issue that could be exploited by Venezuela, I don't think Maduro and his thinkers and his planners, and when they're sitting, planning what to do next with Guyana, they cannot forego the option that we have 30,000 refugees in Guyana. Why don't we pick up 4 or 5 who can do our bidding and do things we want them to do in Guyana, and promote, not necessarily publicly, but clandestinely, the objectives of the Venezuelan government as far as the border contract is concerned. You cannot rule out that possibility. As to the soft invasion, I think that is going to happen over a longer period of time. And the monitoring of exactly where those refugees are should begin now, rather than wait until the numbers build up to the point where, as Dr. Best said, you can have them calling for a referendum in some part of the Essequibo, or have so many of them in different parts of Guyana that they can vote in a referendum to cause all kinds of difficulties. Not that this can happen easily, as I said. This is a highly complex and difficult exercise, but we should prepare ourselves for that eventuality.
Now, the question of whether or not we have these refugees, migrants recorded, it's going to be difficult. The photographs we showed and the bits of footage we showed clearly bring home the reality that landing in Guyana is not through legitimate points of entry. Zealot Sea Dam, Tushin, Coca, Anna Regina, Charity, here's where a large number of persons from Venezuela are entering Guyana. And there seemed to be, unfortunately, some level of cooperation for economic gain by a handful of Guyanese who have set up a ring to receive these persons at these various cocas on the East Bank Essequibo and take them to a particular place, a hotel on the East Bank Essequibo, where they keep them. And from there, they make their way to various areas, principally in the East Bank Essequibo. Ruby, Parika, Zealot, Zeeburg, Tushan, and these various areas. Strategically, it would appear that these persons from Venezuela are focusing their presence in the county of Essequibo. And this is what is giving rise to this belief that this soft invasion is actually taking place and it's creeping. When people land at Tushan or Zealot, for example, there's no police presence, there's no military presence, there's no rural constabulary presence. These people arrive, they get out of the boat, taxis are waiting for them. And this is an area I believe that the government needs to put its thumb on to find out who are these Guyanese who are facilitating illegal entry or entry through illegal points and actually supporting. And you cannot have a situation where a hotel is offering accommodation to refugees for free. Somebody's paying for it. And the government needs to launch an urgent and immediate investigation to determine who are the persons, which group is it that is facilitating this kind of operation, because it goes contrary to Guyana's interests.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think it's an open secret, certainly, if not in the entire country, certainly here in Georgetown, that there are known individuals who facilitate the entry of Venezuelan refugees into Guyana. They're maintained by these people. They're in a sense protected by these people, and that is not in the best interest of Guyana. I do agree with you that an investigation of some kind is not only necessary but urgently so. You can't move around Georgetown and not know what I just said. The problem is with Guyana, anybody who writes about this country, international relations specialist, politician, university professor, UN expert, the first thing they tell you about Guyana is that how porous our borders are. And the last heads of missions conference I attended, one of the most difficult discussions we had is to try and arrive at some kind of understanding as to where the refugees are coming in. You listed a number of places. I found that they're Venezuelan refugees as far afield as parts of Berbice, and they move around. If, for example, one of or family, a number of refugees are here. Let's say they for some reason they can't find accommodation, protection, and settlement in Georgetown. They end up in Berbice. There are a lot of them in Berbice. I was surprised to discover. There are a lot of them along the East Coast. There are a lot of them along the East Bank, for example, and even some places in South Granville Park. To my horror, that I discovered, and I am very happy, and maybe the opposition and certain leaders of the opposition may want to take up this matter in a formal sense, that a census is absolutely necessary for us to determine exactly the number of refugees here, where are they essentially concentrated, and for example, if they are directly or indirectly making a claim on the resources of the administration. Well, that is a right they have under the relevant international UN regulations, but are they doing so in a legal manner or an illegal manner? The other point I would like to raise with you, and I think you touched on it tangentially, is the question of crime. The Venezuelan refugees in Trinidad, unless I've misread the reports, caused havoc at one time in Trinidad. And some of the crimes committed, they were, as I recall, quite brutal. And it would not be in the interest of this country if the refugees from Venezuela coming into Guyana got embroiled or got mixed up or become part of the crime scene here with consequences that we may not be able to control. Because once they come rolling in here, two things happen. Is that the drug industry ticks upwards, and then the flow of weapons will start to come into the country. And then we find ourselves in the middle of a situation which was unplanned, unexpected, and probably most dangerous, not only for the administration, but for the entire society.
Outside of the military maneuvers and the refugees being involved in crime, which is a known fact, there has been, for some time now, the threat of criminal activity by what is known as the Sindicato gang from Venezuela. And we've seen pictorial and video evidence of people being beheaded in Guyana and all of that by this gang. And so that the challenges are enormous. The challenges that face us as a nation are enormous. There's on the one hand the refugees, economic migrants, call them what you will, and the possibility of the involvement in crime. Then there's the Sindicato, which is a known criminal gang, which is well resourced and heavily armed. And then on the other hand, there is the threat of the Venezuelan military based on its unfounded claim. So those are all issues.
So could I just add that, I've known over the years many of the miners who operate in the Cuyuni area. And who David Bacchus, I can call his name, Wilma Chan, and a few of them who died now. But I was hearing from them for at least a decade of the close relationship between the sindicatos and the Venezuelan military. They would, for example, tell you over the years that the sindicatos would come, seize their mining equipment, throw them off their concessions. And when they attempt to resist or protest or put up some kind of fight to retain their concessions and their possessions, the Venezuelan military would intervene and stop. So one isn't sure if the sindicatos at all times operate on their own, or if they're just a cat's paw for the Venezuelan military.
There's some information that has been making the rounds for a couple of years with respect to the operations of the sindicato, which I'd rather leave alone for now.
Okay.
But I want to quickly get your perspective on Guyana's current position on the diplomatic front with respect to this specific issue.
Mm-hmm.
Are we where we need to be?
Mm-hmm.
And if we are not, what do we need to do as a nation to get information to the international community, to win friends in the international community, to get support from friendly governments across the world so that we are better positioned on the diplomatic front, as has been the case under the leadership of President Burnham and President Hoyt in particular?
I think you asked me a very good and important question. With President Burnham and President Hoyt, we were not operating in the most favorable environment. It was a difficult environment. It was a time of an economic crisis, a global economic crisis. And we had to fight against that in the sense that people were focused on saving their economies, saving their societies, as opposed to paying attention to a small country, trying to tell them about the problems they're having with a powerful and irresponsible and aggressive Western neighbor. But we were able to, through persistent efforts, to break through that barrier and to get the world to pay attention to the point where Venezuela, by the time you get to, let us say, 1990, have to change tactics and decide to go for negotiations as opposed to their aggression on the border. I only say this to tell you, and I wanted to raise it at the very beginning of our program this morning, is that we're facing a very difficult set of circumstances in that the world seems to be distracted both by Ukraine and what is going on in the Middle East. So I only raise this because as we proceed to mount a diplomatic defense of our territorial integrity and sovereignty, we'll have to again work to hit down those barriers. A number, I think it is interesting and helpful and reassuring that we've gotten support. I see the Attorney General was at the IPU, and he got support there. CARICOM has come out in Guyana's support. And at a meeting we had with the president there, the office of the president, a few days ago, he did assure us that his government is mounting a major diplomatic exercise to defend the country. Again, as I said, once we start on this exercise, it is my hope and my prayer that it is continuous. It's lasting, and it's not, for example, going to be put on pause for whatever reason. I think Guyana has had 6 years in which it has had to operate in the international society as a nation. Mm-hmm. And it is time we understand that when it comes to the border controversy, and because we have said so publicly on a number of occasions, in the 80s, we said it again recently with the president, that we are one when it comes to the border controversy. We're now, I think, duty-bound to create institutions in this country to ensure that whichever government is in power, that our diplomacy and our information exercises are continuous. It's easy to create a parliamentary body or a national commission body, which could be staffed and on which representatives from political parties as well as non-political representatives can sit, and who can draw on the expertise of people not only in Guyana but in the rest of the region. So whatever happens, whichever government is sitting, we don't have to chop and change when there is an election. I think it's time. We've had 60 years of being a nation. It's time we approach this maturely and to recognize that when it comes to the existence and the sustainability of Guyana as a state, that we should recognize that there's need for a mature and continuous approach for any government that is in power.
Oh, there's a news item published today by Últimas Noticias. It is headlined, Vice President denounced that the President of Guyana plays war drums. And if I may quote a little piece of this report, which was written by Carlos Eduardo Sanchez today. It says, and I'm quoting here, the Executive Vice President of the Republic, Delcy Rodriguez, denounced this Saturday that the President of Guyana, Irfan Ali, plays drums of war and threatens the peace of our Latin America and the Caribbean, violating the declaration of CELAC countries. It goes on to say, from another little part here, that the Vice President pointed out that Ali turned his back on the negotiations mandated by the 1966 Geneva Agreement, the script made by ExxonMobil to sow a confrontation between two neighboring countries follow him verbatim. This, Mr. Austin, does not sound very friendly. It does not come in the same vein as troops being built up on the border to counter illegal mining. And there's a video which we will show now, which clearly sends the message that the Venezuelan military is driving the agenda of this 5-question what is it? It's
Referendum.
the referendum. I beg your pardon.
That's all right.
This referendum, which is scheduled for December 3rd, with these questions that cross the line of legitimacy when it comes to this controversy, is being driven clearly by the military and has the support based on this article I just read. Could we get that video of the general, please?
Preguntas que están siendo
that these people have malintentions. So let's take the video from the top.
por parte del Tribunal Supremo de Justicia. Aquí tengo en mis manos las 5 preguntas que están siendo difundidas ampliamente por todos los medios y redes sociales y en este momento están siendo sometidas a interpretación constitucional por parte del Tribunal Supremo de Justicia. Son 5 preguntas que estarán plasmadas en el referéndum consultivo, un mecanismo constitucional mediante el cual el pueblo será consultado de manera amplia.
So here is a Venezuelan general in uniform, Mr. Austin, saying to the nation of Venezuela and the world, and of course directly to Guyana, that they're going into a referendum. This referendum has 5 simple questions. And he is urging the citizens of Venezuela to support this referendum, which essentially speaks to unlawful annexation of Guyana's territory. What do you make of, first, the Vice President of Venezuela's utterances, and secondly, the involvement of the Venezuelan military in driving this agenda that is the referendum of December 3rd, 2023?
I don't think you can separate the two things. Delcy Rodriguez, when she speaks, you have to pay attention because she is the chief. Let me be careful. She's a very powerful figure in the Maduro administration. And Maduro wants to put something out there that is truly reflective of the sentiments and decisions of his administration. She is the one that does it. And she has a close connection to the military as vice president and as a leading politician in Venezuela. I told you at the beginning that this is the most worrisome thing that I've seen in my lifetime as a diplomat. What happens if driven by the military, as indicated by that general, that in fact you get a yes vote? The key question there is a seizure of the Essequibo. If the Venezuelan people say yes, what happens next? Can Mr. Maduro say that, okay, thank you for saying yes, but look, you all better go back home and eat your plantains and have a alipa and have a drink and relax and give me some time to implement this mandate you've given to me. I don't think it's going to be that easy. I think the Venezuelan government is playing with fire. I think a situation like this can easily get out of control. And if Maduro doesn't want to implement the decision, there might be people within his administration or in the wider society or within the other political parties who might decide to make a reality of what the Venezuelan government has decided. And as you've indicated, it's not only the military which is driving this. Delcy Rodriguez, from that report that you made reference to, she's been going around the country drumming up support for the referendum. And if I were the government and if as advice to my fellow compatriots, I would pay particular attention. I would give great focus. I will do a lot of study and I will seek to find out as much as I can about the internal dynamics driving this referendum, because this is not something the outcome of which we could may not affect the border controversy in a direct, probably in a very dangerous way.
That presents to the nation, this nation, Guyana, cause for worry, cause for deep concern. But I step back again to the fact that we have not yet sufficiently or at all caused the relevant information to get to the attention of the Guyanese population, so that there is no real interest in this matter in a large concentration of the Guyanese population. There has to be immediate action to cause this kind of information to be communicated to our citizens urgently and in a way that impacts and gets their attention. How best do we do this? I mean, I've learned that children are the best teachers of their parents.
Yes.
And so if you get into the school system, when the child comes home and the parents engage the children can say to the parents, Mom, Dad, do you know that Venezuela has been ramping up military operations and that they want, or, the claim is equivocal and that it is unlawful and the claim is without base, and the education process can start. But I mean, where do we go? How swiftly do we move? What do we say to our people as a nation?
As I said, the president assured the leader of the party and the leader of the opposition that they have in prospect a major and robust education program, which he said it's available on different platforms. We have not seen it as yet, and being a very good citizen and a very good diplomat, I'm not going to question the president's word. I'm going to take his word that these matters are being dealt with. But as you said, there's need for urgency. Not urgency in relation to the border controversy as the border controversy, but this particular aspect of the controversy, that is the referendum. Somebody ought to go before the cameras on behalf of the government and say, this is a very dangerous thing, and these are the reasons why it is dangerous. It's being driven by people like Delcy Rodriguez, the Venezuelan military. What are the likely consequences arising from the referendum? I couldn't agree with you more. And I don't think when it comes to education and getting the Guyanese public educated about the controversy generally and the referendum in particular, that should not only be left to our government. There's a lot we can do on our side. And I think what you're doing here this morning is part of that exercise, that we can bring attention to the Guyanese people, that we're facing a relatively dangerous moment in our history. That referendum proposes the incorporation of that's people into Venezuela. It offers the Guyanese people citizenship. It says that they can get rid of the participation at the ICJ. And I want to say that when you tailor such a program, it should not only be, there should be an aspect of any such program which should be tailored specifically for those adjoining areas, region 1, 3,
2, 7.
2, and 7. Specifically for those regions. And I want to say, and I think I raised it with you, and forgive me for interrupting you, it's your program. But we are in a different set of circumstances. There was a time when something happened in region 7 or 2 or 3 in relation to the border controversy or in relation to Venezuela. There might be one report coming out of Caracas from Prensa Latina, or there might be one report in the local press. What is happening, and as you are fully aware, I've seen about 3 videos done by young Amerindian men. I've seen at least 3 of them giving their interpretation of what is going on in that region. I'm not saying, I'm in no position to say, and in fact, I'm not saying that what they're saying is inconsistent with what the government is trying to do. But what I sense from those videos and what as stated by those young men, what has caught their attention is the powerful vehicles that the Venezuelan army has, the planes flying over. That is what is capturing their attention.
I reflect on what you said about the need for some government official to step up to the camera and speak to these issues, address the nation on these issues. The fact that they're happening, the possible consequences, and Guyana's position on these issues. This is absolutely necessary. It is required immediately. I mean, I have seen large billboards with people like Clifton Hickin, a controversial figure when it comes to his appointment as police commissioner. Mm-hmm. I've seen billboards advertising this, that, and the other project, most of which are embroiled in allegations of corruption from the point of tender to the point of completion. Millions of dollars spent on these billboards, but not a single billboard that says to this nation and every visitor to this country, Essequibo is we own. Not a single billboard that says all of Guyana belongs to Guyanese. Not a single billboard that depicts the map of Guyana and says, this is Guyana. Venezuela's claim is baseless. You know, I have not seen any of those. And it is necessary for the government to speak to the issues of the referendum and the Vice President of Venezuela's utterances today. Guyanese should wake up tomorrow and see billboards all across this country, particularly on the Essequibo Coast, East Bank Essequibo, in parts of Region 1, particularly Baramita, Mabaruma, Port Kaituma, and so on, and in Region 7 at Kaikan, at Ituringbang. Tomorrow morning, we should wake up and see those posters, reassuring the people of this country that the government has your back. The diplomacy drive is on, the diplomatic drive is on to bring our information to the international community's attention, and we are asserting our right. The other thing is, Mr. Austin, as we get closer down to program time, the indigenous peoples of this country own by title a lot of the land on Guyana's frontier with Venezuela. The same is true for Brazil and Suriname, but we're focusing on Venezuela here. The indigenous peoples are a first point of contact with anyone stepping across that border, with whatever intention. The indigenous peoples of this country were the first victims of aggression by Venezuela. The pontoons that were blown up, the persons who were arrested in the Cuyuni River, whose valuables were taken away from them, whose freedom was taken away from them. They were taken into custody by Venezuelan military and all that. The indigenous peoples of this country need assurance from the government and opposition of this country that we are in fact united. This is our position, this is our stated position, but how do we get this message directly into Baramita, which is the largest Carib village in Guyana, and is probably half a day's walk to Venezuela? How do we get this message to Kaikan, where you just swim across a little river? Just a river separates Guyana from Venezuela. How do we get this message to Whitewater in the Northwest District, where a creek separates Guyana from Venezuela? How do we get the message to Camwata? How do we get a message to Yarakita? When do we get this message to these indigenous communities, let alone the coast?
I think we should get it urgently. And as I said, you know, our messages on any national issue, any major national question, tends to be addressed to the nation as a whole. In this particular case, you need to tailor, as I said, a message that deals specifically, or your audience should be the Guyanese citizens in those areas you have mentioned.
In their language.
And in their language. I don't know if you recall in the 80s, they used to translate those booklets or leaflets on the border controversy into the respective languages.
Mostly Wapichan, I believe.
Yes. And that is something that needs to be done. Because, as I said, the videos to which I referred, I don't get the impression that there is, and I don't think that is their fault. What they're saying in those videos, it doesn't reflect a wide understanding of what is going on between Venezuela and Guyana. They have a narrow focus because there is an immediate impact on their livelihood as far as Venezuela is concerned. And this goes for the miners too, who have concessions in those areas and who have to depend on Venezuelans in one form or another for things like petrol and other goods they need for their mining operations. So I do agree with you, and I don't know if the leader of the opposition is interested, but certainly a letter to this effect to the right to the president or to whichever authority is in place, because this particular matter, addressing that specific audience we're talking about, those indigenous or citizens from those areas, ought to be addressed as quickly as possible.
You see, here's the challenge, Mr. Austin. When it comes to indigenous peoples, particularly in the South American and neighboring region, we know no borders. We are free roamers of our lands. And there was a time when South America belonged to all of us, indigenous peoples. There was a time when
Thanks for allowing me to stay.
there was a time when there were no borders separating states in South America. And in the minds of most indigenous peoples in South America today, we are free to move from country to country, border notwithstanding. So there is that challenge of dealing with the delineation of those borders and the psyche of the indigenous people. Because indigenous people can cross over from Venezuela to Colombia, from Guyana to Brazil, as they do traditionally to from Cashew Island to Suriname, and so on. And in our minds, generally, there are no borders. So the education campaign has got to take that into consideration and to, as you said, specifically tailor measures to our indigenous peoples. They have been the keepers, the maintainers, the protectors of our borders.
Yeah.
And this has been so since independence. I don't know, perhaps you could offer the government in your closing remarks some advice as to, in addition, perhaps, or reiterating some of what you've already said, where do we go from here? How swiftly and in what direction?
Well, I certainly await, and I certainly the leader of the opposition and leader of our party and the rest of the opposition, we are awaiting an unfolding or unrolling of this education exercise. And in my judgment, it can't happen too quickly. I don't think we have much time to get our message out to our people. I mean the Guyanese people, because we certainly don't want the situation where that referendum comes and we're still behind the 8 ball, as it were, and we're still trying to catch up with the momentum generated by the referendum. I think by the time that referendum is held, we should have certainly saturated our society with the background to the controversy, the implications of the controversy, and don't forget, most importantly, what it means for Guyana at this critical point in our national development. Because Venezuela, as we've seen in so often in our history, has really tried to stymie the economic development of it. And it's Delcy Rodriguez, President Maduro. They feel that ExxonMobil is a legitimate target, and they're zeroing in on ExxonMobil and suggesting that they're doing all kinds of nefarious activities, that they paid for the airplane that took us to The Hague, and that kind of thing that, as I said earlier, is likely to, if a Guyanese is not aware of the true circumstances, to be confused and to be not persuaded, but to be distracted by that kind of propaganda. So my advice is, let us get to work as quickly as possible. There isn't much time.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Austin, CCH. Thank you very much for joining me on Nation Watch today. Thank you for your insights into this matter of the Guyana-Venezuela controversy. I trust that our viewing and listening population is now better informed. We will continue to discuss this issue over time. And for now, Thank you very much for joining us on Nation Watch. Thank you very much for staying with us throughout the entirety of the program. And we look forward to having you join us again next Sunday by God's grace. Until then, so long.
Now we're gone already.